Hi, my name is Jim Egan. I work with Plant Revolution Incorporated, where we have over 20 years of working with the science of soil biology. Our blends include some of the most diverse and concentrated species of soil probiotics on the market. Our blends include everything from mycorrhizal fungi to soil bacteria to even soil yeasts and trichoderma. We've been serving the plant and horticultural industries for, as I said, about 2 decades now. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what makes a healthy soil, what makes a well-balanced soil, what types of organisms exist in the soil, and then we're really going to dive into what we specialize in, mycorrhizal fungi and beneficial soil bacteria. So we'll learn all about the ecology of these organisms, where they come from, what their history is with plants, and then we'll talk a little bit about how they're being used in modern agriculture and horticulture, and really how you can nurture these organisms in your own garden and really host a rich soil that allows for them to prosper and exist and really benefit your plants in terms of nutrient uptake, water storage, transplant shock, all sorts of benefits that your plants naturally see from these organisms in undisturbed ecosystems like the forest that I'm standing in front of today. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I really look forward to digging into some of this with you guys. So a healthy soil really includes a whole myriad of life. Some of those organisms are, like I said, the fungi, microscopic bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, a whole host of worms and other soil organisms. In a healthy soil, 1 thimbleful of soil can actually contain several miles of fungal filaments. And a teaspoon contains up to 100 million or maybe even up to 100 billion bacteria. So what is beneficial soil biology, specifically mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria, and what purpose does it really serve in the soil? The 10,000 foot view is that it's really, I think of it as you have a plant and then you have your fertilizer. That's traditionally how gardening and agriculture is thought of. But there's a huge component missing in that, and essentially that's the biological component, the biological sphere. And in the history of plants and how they work in undisturbed soil environments is that biological component is really responsible for the interchange between the other two, the fertilizer or the organic matter, things like decomposing leaves, decomposing animals, all the things, rock, that make up plant food in their raw forms, but are not yet available to the plant. And then you have the plant and the root system over here. Well, in between the two, you have a plant's root system covered in this fungus, mycorrhizal fungi, which are really good at breaking down organic matter and making it plant available. Same thing with the beneficial bacteria, working hand in hand with the fungi and the plant feeding all of these organisms sugar so that they do their things and they can really grow and multiply. And what they do is so if you look at a decomposing log in a forest, for example, it's covered in white mycelium, and I'm sure if you look under a microscope, it's covered in bacteria. These decomposers of planet Earth are breaking these materials down and really making those plant available. So, I mean, without that biological component, you don't really have an interplay between the plants and the biology. Now that's where chemical fertilizers come in and they chelate these nutrients, but you know, shortcuts often have really big drawbacks, right? And these chemical fertilizers, even though they can make a plant grow, it's oftentimes on steroids. It's unbalanced growth. So that's why you have to, you know, pump them with tons of pesticides and things like that, and biocides and things that prop them up artificially because they don't have all these other really aids and balance in their makeup and their structure. So a lot of the services that are provided by these other layers, these biological layers, have to be artificially taken care of by these chemicals that we use. So why don't we take a little bit deeper dive into the mycorrhizal fungi. So mycorrhizae literally means fungus root. You may have heard of this. Myco meaning fungus, and rhizae like rhizome or rhizosphere meaning root. So it literally means fungus root because the organism cannot exist without a root or a host plant. So the mycorrhizal fungi colonize the root systems of roughly 95% of plants, which is almost all plants, and it extends out from the root system into the soil. These tiny mycorrhizal filaments, also called mycelium, really extend a plant's reach and range into the soil. I mean, this means that you're increasing the surface area that's taking up minerals and nutrients as well as water. Another characteristic of the fungi is that they have the ability to release chemicals and substances and even change the pH around them to unlock soil nutrients. And that's one of the main functions of the mycorrhizae and why plants form with them. Plant roots have a limited ability to actually absorb minerals and nutrients, which is why they partner with the mycorrhizal fungi. They also form and partner with a lot of bacteria, so they will release exudates into the soil around them to encourage and enhance this soil biology so that all organisms are thriving. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. That's difficult to do when the biology inherent around the plant is very low. So we'll get into a little bit more about how you can enhance that soil biology so the plant has these allies to call on when it faces a stress or needs them. Generally, there's two broad groupings. You have your endomycorrhizae and your ectomycorrhizae. That covers about 95% of plants. The endomycorrhizae is also referred to as vesicular arbuscular mycorrhizae, or VAM, as you may have heard of it, or arbuscular mycorrhizae. So all these terms are generally describing the endomycorrhizal fungi. And when you're talking about endo, you're talking roughly about 80 to 85% of plants on Earth form with this mycorrhizal fungi. So, I mean, you can throw almost anything that you commonly grow into this grouping, from tomatoes to almonds to avocados to banana. Really, all these types of plants form with the endomycorrhizae. When you're talking about ecto, you're generally talking about your tree-forming variety. So you think of your conifers, your oaks, things like that. Are generally going to be grouped with this group, excluding most fruit trees. Most fruit trees form with the endomycorrhizae. So endomycorrhizae, also known as VAM or vesicular arbuscular mycorrhizae, are characterized by these structures called arbuscules. And when you look at a plant root that's been colonized by this type of mycorrhizae, or the endomycorrhizae, what you'll see is that there are these structures that actually penetrate into the cells of the root themselves and forms what looks like the root system of a tree. Scientists have termed this arbuscules, and it's the point at which the mycorrhizae exchanges the nutrients and the minerals that it accumulates from the soil into the plant itself. So when you look at it under a microscope, you'll see this structure, and it's literally, it does penetrate the root cell, but there's a small membrane still around it within the cell of the root, and it's where the plant is feeding the fungus the sugars and the carbohydrates that it requires from photosynthesis for the minerals, nutrients, and water from the soil. So it's a highly mutually beneficial relationship, symbiotic relationship, as it's called sometimes, between the mycorrhizal fungi and the plant itself. Ectomycorrhizae consist of a hyphal sheath or mantle surrounding the root tip, and they actually go out into the soil, feeding the trees, in this case, nutrients, minerals, and water. And it's actually been shown that trees of different species will actually connect through this mycelial network and help each other develop. So oftentimes the trees, the younger trees that are unable to get enough sunlight from photosynthesis or are experiencing other difficulties in maturing will actually be nurtured by surrounding trees and by the older trees or the more mature trees in the environment. So the mycorrhizal fungi perform a range of functions, not just enhancing, the surface area of the roots themselves. One of the things they do is they enhance drought tolerance. So this is an ability of the plant to withstand periods of low water in the soil. One of the ways they do this is they themselves are filled to some degree with water and moisture. So when there's drought conditions, the plant actually releases some of that water back up into the root system. Many of our desert species heavily rely on the mycorrhizal fungi, and in fact, in our blends, one of the species, Glomus deserticola, is actually isolated from a desert environment. So there's a lot of different characteristics of mycorrhizal fungi depending on where they were isolated from and where their natural habitat is. They have, like I said, all sorts of different abilities to help the plant. Another one is transplant shock. So in our research, and it's pretty established now in the scientific literature, that when a plant does have mycorrhizal fungi on the root system and has it available to call on, plants actually are able to withstand a lot of stresses, including transplant shock. So the plant is able to really bypass sort of that shock period when it's establishing into a new environment. Like I said, a couple of the ways that it does that is having the ability of the mycorrhizal fungi to help it deal with maybe some drought stress or maybe some nutrients getting locked up in the soil. The mycorrhizal fungi can actually break those down and keep the plant feeding on the nutrients that it needs to stay happy. So a lot of people often ask, don't my soils already contain mycorrhizae? Or, I have a extensive composting system that has lots of fungi in it. Aren't they already existing in my soils? Well, one of the things that research has shown us, over the last 20, 30 years is that the mycorrhizal populations in soils that have been disturbed, and that includes almost any soil that humans have settled on, actually contain very low levels of mycorrhizal fungi. They're very temperamental organisms, so oftentimes logging roads, and then not to mention building cities, building roads, building housing developments, tilling, agriculture. All these things severely hamper mycorrhizae's ability to stay around in a soil, and so, we usually find pretty low counts in these types of soils. And unfortunately, unlike bacteria and or some other organisms, saprophytic fungi, for example, which is basically like the fungi that don't need a root system to live on. So the fungi you'll find breaking down a log, or like an oyster mushroom that you can grow in your kitchen, those don't need the plant root symbiosis. So mycorrhizal fungi take a lot longer to actually colonize back into an ecosystem after it's been damaged. So you're not going to find them in your compost bin generally. You're not going to find very high levels in your soils if they've been destroyed from the original habitat. And so that is actually one of the benefits of using a mycorrhizal inoculum, is it quickly reintroduces it and gives the plant access to these organisms in a rapid pace. What's interesting is that you can bring diversity of mycorrhizal fungi back into your landscape, but it's actually the plants that decide which to form with. So we've learned through research that plants actually allow the mycorrhizae to colonize them. So it's not like it's a forced relationship between the fungi and the root itself. It's the plant that initiates the relationship depending on its need. For example, if the plant's lacking in phosphorus, which is a common reason mycorrhizae form with plants, it'll actually allow a species of mycorrhizae that can better deal with phosphorus uptake and making it more bioavailable. Whereas if it's something to do with drought stress or some other micronutrient, the plant can actually change, and we've seen Douglas fir trees with many mycorrhizal associations on one tree at one time. And even throughout the season, the needs of the plants change, and that mycorrhizal association can shift from species to species. So having a great compost system is certainly part of having feeding that soil food web and feeding all of those organisms. And on top of that, mycorrhizal inoculation is kind of another level of adding to that system and help speeding that up. So a lot of times people also wonder, how long are these spores around? How long do they last? So a spore for mycorrhizal fungi can last a significant amount of time. We have an ongoing experiment of germinating spores in pure water that's, I believe, 12 years old. They've germinated spores out of the ancient Egyptian tombs. And so kept in the proper conditions, under about 80, 90 degrees. You can go up to, I think, 120 degrees, but generally you want to keep it, below 85 degrees and above freezing if you can, and somewhat dry. So just think of like what the conditions are like under the soil. And that's kind of how you want to keep it. You don't want to introduce too much moisture. And we give our products a 3-year shelf life. But what we've seen is there's generally a 10% reduction in viability every year thereafter. So they slowly become unavailable like you would find in a seed pack. That being said, once the organisms are introduced to moisture or other soil organisms, they can become food. A number of things can happen to where the mycorrhizae become unavailable. So, 3 years is about how long you have once you buy a product from a company like ours. But once they're introduced in the soil, either they're going to form with the plant, so you want to put it directly on the plant root, or you're going to have a lot of unknowns in terms of whether or not they've been consumed by other organisms, etc. So a lot of people want to know about mixing mycorrhizal inoculums into something like a compost tea. And what we suggest is generally, for the mycorrhizal fungi portion of it, it's best to use that directly on your root system. So introducing it into a larger environment with moisture and other organisms, it doesn't really do anything. The mycorrhizal fungi don't germinate until they actually come in contact with a root system. There's a chemical released by the root that actually germinates the mycorrhizal fungi. So we generally recommend using the mycorrhizae right away on the root system. Our blends do contain a number of bacteria and trichoderma and things like that. So if you did use it in a compost tea, one of our water-soluble products, it would actually, the bacteria could actually reproduce and be of benefit to that compost tea. But generally we say you can, mix it in right before you apply it, or just apply it directly to the roots themselves. Another question about mycorrhizae is, can I use this with other products? Can I use it with chemical fertilizers or pesticides? And generally we say that that's okay, as long as you don't apply them at the same time. You want to stagger your applications. Once the mycorrhizal fungi is established on the root system, it's almost impossible to kill them without killing the plant itself. They literally become an extension of the root system. So, it's really hard to hurt the mycorrhizae once they're part of the plant. So let's summarize the benefits of mycorrhizal fungi if we can in just a few bullet points. So start off with, it enhances the size of the root system. So it's an extension of the root system. With that, you have more surface area taking up nutrients and minerals. So you have enhanced nutrient and mineral uptake as well as enhanced water uptake. What that leads to is more foliage, more yield. With that, you also see enhanced transplant ability to deal with transplant shock. So a lot lessened transplant shock. You see the ability to deal with water shortages a lot more than a plant that doesn't have its mycorrhizal symbiote. You also see, just in general, you see an ability to deal with stress a lot better. The plant also needs a lot less water. It also enhances the water holding capacity of the soil long term. As well, a big advantage is enhancing the soil structure around the plant long term. It does this through what's called glomalin. It's an exudate, means it's pushed out by the mycorrhizal fungi. It's an organic glue. It's about 50% carbon, and what that does is it actually glues soil particles together. So your soil structure, getting air and water movement through that soil, is actually enhanced. And one of the big advantages of that is that those are highly carbon structures. So you're taking atmospheric carbon and you're storing it in soil. So when they say that forests are a carbon sink, one of the big ways it does it is through the mycorrhizal fungi. There are several ways to get mycorrhizal fungi into your landscape. Generally, the two main types are using a water-soluble product and watering it into your plant, or using a granular product and sprinkling it into the transplant when you're transplanting. For either application method, the most important part is making contact with the root system. Mycorrhizae don't come out of dormancy until they actually touch a root system. With the granular, you simply take a little bit of the product, sprinkle it right on the roots themselves and in the planting hole. You really can't burn your plants with it, and you want to make sure that you have physical contact. With the water soluble, you're going to want to mix that in water and then water it into your plants. There's all sorts of different products for using this, from soil to fertigation systems, drip irrigation, hydroponics. Generally, once the spores become into solution, it's really easy to deliver that onto the root system. So what are bacteria in soil? What do they do? What's their purpose? Why are they so important? Well, bacteria work closely with the plants to make available soil nutrients, the minerals locked up in rocks, help deliver water and store water in soils. There's a number of functions. Just like the mycorrhizal fungi, the plant is actively, I think of it as orchestrating the bacteria in the soil. So plants take sunlight and convert it into carbohydrates and sugars through photosynthesis, and then they send that out through their root systems into the soil, some of it, and encourage different various types of bacteria. So these bacteria involved in all sorts of processes, everything from breaking down, solubilizing minerals and nutrients like phosphorus, that then becoming part of their tissue, them dying, that becoming basically plant food, little bags of fertilizer. They release enzymes into the soil, which helps further break down and cycle organic matter. They release glues into the soil, and these glues help glue soil particles together. So this actually, over the long term, enhances the soil structure. So this gives you your nice, crumbly soil texture that can hold more water, allows more airflow through it. A lot of that actually has to do with the biology and the bacteria specifically. So bacteria are really important allies for plants and healthy soil systems. Our research has showed us that having a lot of diversity in the bacteria allows the plant to really choose which ones to form with, which allows it to deal with a lot of stresses in the soil. So let's summarize the benefits of a healthy bacteria community in your soil. One of them is phosphorus solubilization, so you're going to get a lot less of your phosphorus locked up in the soil, which is your flowering nutrient. So if you want, big yields, healthy flowers, things like that, it's really dependent on the phosphorus, and you may have enough phosphorus in your soil, but if it's locked up, your plant does not have access to it, and the bacteria are a big part of keeping that plant available. Another thing is nitrogen fixation. So bacteria can actually fix a lot of nitrogen in your soil, another one of the macronutrients, NPK. So having a healthy bacteria population can actually reduce your nitrogen needs and nitrogen inputs for your plant. Bacteria release a lot of enzymes in your soils, so these are the things that are going to be turning organic matter into plant food a lot faster. You also get a lot of organic glues released by the bacteria, so once again, long term, you're building that soil up. You're getting a lot better soil structure, so air and water movement through the soil. Bacteria also release a high level of amino acids, so this is really helping in plant production and overall biomass. So there's a whole host of products on the market, and generally they fall into a couple categories: water soluble or granular. Granular, like I said, can be sprinkled in when you're transplanting, banded or seeded out in your rows. You can mix it into potting soil, or you're going to have a water soluble, send out through a fertigation system. You can water it in just with a simple watering can. You can also use that in hydroponic systems. You can use it on a hose end sprayer if you're applying it to a lawn or something like that. And so we're going to explore, I'm going to take you into the garden, and we'll just do a couple inoculations to show how easy it is to really get these organisms right down into your root system. So here we are in a simple raised bed garden, smart pots, and we're going to apply a water-soluble version of the mycorrhizal inoculant. So what you want to do, very easy, this specific product, it's a teaspoon to a gallon of water. So you take your inoculum, measure out the appropriate amount. We're mixing it in here to just a simple watering can. You do want to agitate it, make sure that everything's nice and dispersed evenly throughout the solution. And although there are specific amounts for specific plants, really what you want to do is saturate the root ball, saturate the root system, make sure that the inoculum is all in and throughout the spores, or through the roots, to get a really even dispersal. And it's as easy as just watering it into the plant itself. So here we have good drainage. It's ensuring that the inoculum is getting down into the root system. You can do seedlings, you can do established plants, really just watering your entire garden. Easy as that. Your plants are inoculated, ready to go. You really can't use too much of the concentrates. It's like this one has fertilizer and a little bit of seaweed. So, I'm sorry, it has a little bit of seaweed and humic acids. So you really, it'd be hard pressed to overdo it. I use it every couple weeks, almost every week. Really, it's just a benefit. I like to think of it as like a probiotic for your plants. The more you use it, the more you're just ensuring with the bacteria and the fungi that your nutrients aren't getting locked up, that the roots are covered in their beneficial allies, and just making sure that it's really like a lubricant for the fertilizer and the soil biology to make sure everything's moving properly in the root system. Yeah, so let's do a granular inoculation next. So here we are with the granular inoculant. This one is Plant Success Organics Granular. and it has a little pop top right on top. And what we're gonna do is sprinkle a little bit down into the hole. So when those roots go down in there, they're gonna have some nice inoculum right on them. And what I like to do, this is a early girl tomato, so we'll bury a little bit of the stem down in there as well. But what I like to do is actually sprinkle some of the inoculum right on the roots themselves. Really seems to give a good effect and getting everything off to a really good start. So loosen up the root ball just a bit, plant down some of that stem down in there. It's as simple as that. Now you're ensuring that all of those microbes and the root system are right in contact with each other, and the plant has everything it needs to really get off to a fantastic start. So that's really it. If you have any questions, well, we're always available on our website, plantsuccessorganics.com. Shoot us an email. Check us out on Instagram. We're always available and love to answer questions. I want to thank Mother Earth News for putting this on. Hope you guys are having a great fair. We really appreciate working with you guys. If unfortunately we can't meet up in person like we've done in the past few years, but we hope everyone's having fun in their gardens and really thriving and trying to really just enjoy this time that we have at our homes and in our backyard. So hope to see you all soon, and thanks for taking time out to check in with us. Bye-bye.